Chapter 30. Coriolanus stood stunned as the guard slapped him on the back, laughing. You're the youngest person ever to pass the test, the commander beamed. Ordinarily, we train you here, but your scores recommend you for an elite program in District 2. We'll be sorry to see you go. Oh, how he wished he could go. To District 2, which was not really that far from his home in the capital. To officer school, elite officer school, where he could distinguish himself and find a way back to a life worth living. This might be an even better road to power than the university had offered, but there was still a murder weapon with his name on it out there. His DNA would condemn him, just as it had as the handkerchief. Sadly, tragically, it was too dangerous to stay. He hurt to play along. What time do I leave? He asked. There's a hovercraft headed the way early tomorrow morning. You'll be on it. You're off today, I think. Use the time to pack up and say your goodbyes. The commander shook his head for the second time in 2 days. We expect three things from you. Coriolanus thanked the commander and headed outside, where he stood a moment weighing his options. It was no use. There was no options. Hating himself and hating Sejanus Plinth even more, he walked toward the building that housed the generator, almost not caring if he was apprehended. What a bitter disappointment to have a second chance at a bright future so irrevocably stripped away. He had to remind himself of the rope, the gallows, and the jabberjays mimicking his last words to renew his focus. He was about to desert the peacekeepers. He needed to snap out of it. When he reached the building, he took a quick look over his shoulder, but the base still slept. He slunk around the back without witnesses. He examined the fence and could find no opening at first. He wound his fingers in the links and gave them a shake of frustration. Sure enough, the mesh pulled free of the supporting pole, leaving a break in the fence he could just squeeze through. Outside, his natural awareness reinstated itself. He skirted around the rear of the base and through a wooded area, eventually making his way to the road that led to the hanging tree. Once there, he simply followed a path that the truck had taken on previous trips, walking briskly but not so fast as to attract attention. There was a precious little to attract anyway on the hot Sunday shortly after dawn. Most miners and peacekeepers would not rise for hours. After a few miles, he reached the depressing field and broke into a run for the hanging tree, eager to conceal himself in the woods. There was no sign of Lucy Gray as he passed under the branches. He wondered if in fact he misinterpreted a message and should have headed into the seam instead. Then he caught a glimpse of Orange and tracked it to a clearing. There she stood, unloading a stack of bundles from a small wagon, a scarf wound in a fetching manner around her head. She ran over and hugged him, and he responded, even though it felt too hot for an embrace. The kiss that followed put him in a better mood. His hand went to the orange scarf in her hair. This seems very bright for fugitives. Lucy Gray smiled. Well, I don't want you to lose me. You still up for this? I've got no choice, realizing the sound half-thwarted. You're all that matters to me now. You too. You're my life now. Sitting here, waiting for you to show up, I realize I'd never really be brave enough to do this without you. It's not just how hard it'll be, it's too lonely. I might have made it for a few days, but then I'd have to come home to the cubby. I know, I didn't even consider running until you brought it up. It's so daunting. He ran a hand over the bundles. I'm sorry, I couldn't risk bringing anything much. I didn't think you could. I've been collecting all of this, and I raided our storeroom too. It's okay. I left the cubby the rest of the money. As if convincing herself, she said, that'll be okay. She hoisted up the pack and threw it over her shoulder. He gathered some supplies. What will they do? I mean, the band without you. Oh, they'll get by. They can all carry a tune, and What Ivory's just a few years from replacing me as lead singer anyway. Besides, the way trouble seems to find me, I'd be wearing out my welcome in District 12. Last night, the commander told me not to sing the hanging tree anymore. Too dark, he said. Too rebellious. More like it. I promise you'd never hear it from my lips again. Strange song offered Coriolanus. Lucy Gray laughed. Well, Maud Ivory likes it. She says it's a real authority. Like my voice. When I sang the anthem in Capital, Coriolanus remembered. That's it, said Lucy Gray. You ready? They divided everything between them. It took him a moment to realize what was missing. Your guitar, you're not taking it? I'm leaving it for Maud Avery. That's Mama's dress. She struggled to make light of it. What will I need for them for? Tan Amber thinks there's still people in North, but I'm not convinced. I think it's just going to be us. For a moment, he realized that he wasn't the only one leaving his dreams behind. We'll get new dreams out there, Coriolanus promised, and with more conviction than he felt. He pulled out his father's compass, consulted, and pointed. North is this way. I thought we'd head to the lake first. It's mostly north. I'd kind of like to see it one more time, she said. It seemed as good as a plan as any, so he didn't object. Soon they'd just be adrift in the wilderness, never to return. Why not indulge her? He tucked the bit in her scarf that had come loose. The lake it is. Lucy gazed back at the town, although the only thing Coriolanus could make out was the gallows. Goodbye, District 12. Goodbye, Hanging Tree and Hunger Games and Mayor Lip. Someday something will kill me, but it won't be you. She turned and headed deeper into the woods. Not much to miss, agreed with Coriolanus. I'll miss the music and my pretty bird, said Lucy Gray with the catch in her voice. I'm hoping one day they can follow me, though. You know what I won't miss? People, Coriolanus replied. Except for a handful. They're mostly awful if you think about it. People aren't so bad, really, she said. It's what the world does to them, like us in the arena. We did things in there we'd never consider. They just left us alone. I don't know, I killed Mayfair and there was no arena in sight, he said. But only to save me, she thought it over. I think there's a natural goodness built into human beings. You know, when you've stepped across the line into evil and it's your life's challenge to try and stay on the right side of that. Sometimes there are tough decisions. You've been making them all summer. I know that, of course I do. I'm a victor, she said. It'd be nice in my new life not to have it kill anybody else. I'm with you there. 3 seems enough for one lifetime, and certainly enough for one summer. A feral cry came from nearby, reminding him of his lack of a weapon. I'm going to make a walking stick. Do you want one? She pulled up. Sure, that could come in handy in more ways than one. They found a couple of stout branches, and she studied them while he snapped off their limbs. Who's the third? What? She gave him a funny look. His hand slipped, driving a piece of bark under his nail. Ow! She ignored his injury. Person you killed. You said you killed 3 people this summer. Coriolanus spit at the end of a splinter to pull out with its teeth, buying a moment of time. Who indeed? The answer was Sejanus, of course, but he couldn't admit that. Can you get this out? He held his hand, wiggling the compromised fingernail, hoping to distract her. Let me see, she examined the splinter. So, Bobbin, Mayfair, who's the third? His mind raced for plausible explanation. Could he have been involved in a freak accident? A training death? He was cleaning a weapon and went off by mistake? He decided it was best to make a joke of it. Myself, I killed the old me so I could come with you. She plucked the splinter free. There, well, I hope the old you doesn't haunt the new you. We've already got enough ghosts between us. The moment passed, but it had killed the conversation. Neither of them spoke again until the halfway point, where they stopped for a breather. Lucy Gray unscrewed the plastic jug and offered it to him. Will they miss you yet? Probably not until dinner. You? He took a deep drink of water. Only one up when I left was Tam Amber. So I told him I was going to find a goat. We've been talking about it, building a herd. Sell the milk as a sideline, she said. They probably got a few more hours before they start looking. Might be night before they think about me in the hanging tree and find the wagon. They'll put it together. He handed her the jug. Will they try to follow you? Maybe, but we'll be too far gone. She took a swig and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Will they hunt you? He doubted the peacekeepers would be concerned about me any time soon. Why would he desert with an elite officer school waiting? If anyone ever noticed he was missing, they'd probably think he'd gone into town with another peacekeeper. Unless they found the gun, of course. He didn't want to go into all that school stuff now while the wound was still fresh. I don't know. Even when they realize I've run, they won't know where to look. They hiked down towards the lake, each lost in their own thoughts. It all seemed unreal to him, as if there was just a pleasure outing, as the 1-2 Sundays ago had been, as if they were going for a picnic. And he must be sure to get back in time for fried bologna curfew, but no. When they reached the lake, they moved on into the wilderness to a life consumed with the most basic type of survival. How would they eat? Where would they live? And what on earth would they do with themselves when the challenges of obtaining food and shelter had been met? Her, with no music, him with no school, military, anything, have a family? It seemed too bleak an existence to condemn a child. Any child, let alone one of his own. What was there to aspire to once wealth, fame, power had been limited? Was the goal of survival further survival and nothing more? Preoccupied as he was with these questions, the second leg of the journey to the lake passed quickly. Preoccupied as they set down their loads on the shore, and Lucy Gray went directly to find branches for fishing poles. We don't know what lies ahead, so we better fill up here. She showed him how to attach the heavy thread and hook their poles. Clawing through the soft mud for worms disgusted him, and he wondered if this would be a daily activity. It would if they were hungry enough. They baited the hooks and sat silently in the bank, waiting for a strike as the birds chattered around them. She caught two. He caught nothing. Heavy dark clouds rolled in, providing some relief from the beating sun, but added to his oppression. This was his life now, digging for worms and being at the mercy of the weather. Elemental, like an animal. He knew this would be easier if he wasn't such an exceptional person, the best and brightest humanity had to offer, the youngest to pass the officer candidate test. If he'd been useless and stupid, the loss of civilization would not have hollowed out his inside in this manner. He'd have taken it in stride. Thick, cold raindrops began to plop down on him, leaving wet marks in his fatigues. Never be able to cook in this, Lucy Gray said. Better go inside. There's a fireplace in there we can use. She could only mean the lake house that still had a roof. Probably his last roof until he built one himself. How do you build a roof anyway? It had not been a question on the officer candidate test after she quickly cleaned the fish and wrapped them in leaves. They gathered up their bundles and hurried to the house as the rain pelted them. It might have been fun if it hadn't been his real life. Just an adventure for a few hours with a charming girl and fulfilling future elsewhere. The door was jammed, but Lucy Gray bumped into it with her hip and swung it open. They scrambled in and out of the wet and dropped their belongings. It was only one room with concrete walls, ceiling, and floor. There was no sign of electricity, but light came through the windows and four sides of the single door. His eyes lit on the fireplace full of ashes with a neat pile of dried wood stacked behind it. At least they wouldn't have to forage for that. Lucy Gray crossed the fireplace, laid the fish down on a little concrete hearth, and began to arrange layers of woods on twigs and an old metal grate. We keep some wood in here so there's always drum dry. Coriolanus considered the possibility of just staying in the sturdy little house. Plenty of wood around and a lake to fish in, but no, it'd be too dangerous to put down roots too this close to District 12. If the cubby knew of this spot, surely other people did too. He had to deny himself even the last sort of protection. Would he end up in a cave? He thought of the beautiful snow penthouse with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, his home, his rightful home. The wind blew a splatter of rain in, peppering his pants with icy drops. He swung the door shut behind him and froze. The door had concealed something, a long burlap bag. From the opening poked the barrel of a shotgun. It couldn't be. Unable to breathe, he nudged the bag open with his boot, revealing the shotgun and the peacekeeper's rifle. A little more, and he could recognize the grenade launcher. Beyond question, these were the black market guns that Janus had bought in the shed, and among them, murder weapons. Lucy Gray lit the fire. I brought along an old metal can, thinking maybe we can carry live coals from place to place. I don't have many matches, and it's hard to get a fire going from flint. Uh-huh, said Coriolanus. Good idea. How had the weapons gotten here? It made sense, really. Billy Tope could have brought Spruce to the lake, or maybe Spruce had simply known about it anyway. It would have been useful to the rebels during the war to have as a hideout, and Spruce had been smart enough to know he couldn't risk hiding the evidence in District 12. Hey, what'd you find there? Lucy Gray joined him and leaned down, pulling the burlap from the weapons. Oh, are these the ones they had in the shed? I think they must be, he said. Should we take the guns along? Lucy Gray drew back, rose to her feet, and considered them for a long moment. Rather not. I don't trust them. This will come in handy, though. She pulled out a long knife, turning the blade over in her hand. I think I'll go dig up some catnip since we can get the fire going anyway. There's a good patch by the lake. I thought they weren't ready, he said. 2 weeks can make a lot of difference, she said. It's still raining. You'll get soaked. Well, I'm not made of sugar. In truth, he was happy for a minute alone to think. After she left, he lifted the bottom of the burlap bag, and the weapon slid out of the floor. Kneeling beside the pile, he picked up the peacekeeper's rifle he'd killed Mayfair with and cradled it in his arms. Here it was, the murder weapon, not in Capital Forensic Lab, but here in his hands, in the middle of the wilderness where it posed no threat at all. All he had to do was destroy it, and he would be free of the hangman's noose, free to go back to base, free to go forward to District 2, free to rejoin the human race without fear. Tears of relief flooded his eyes, and he began to laugh out of sheer joy. How would he do that? Burn it in the bonfire? Disassemble it? Scatter the parts of the four winds? Throw it in the lake? Once the gun was gone, there'd be nothing to connect him to the murders. Absolutely nothing. No, wait, there would be one thing. Lucy Gray. Well, no matter, she'd never tell. She wouldn't be thrilled, obviously, when he told her there'd be a change of plans, that he was turning to peacekeepers and headed in District 2 tomorrow at dawn, essentially leaving her to her fate. Still, she'd never rat him out. It wasn't her style, and it would implicate her in the murders as well. It would mean she'd wind up dead, as Hunger Games had shown. Lucy Gray possessed an extraordinary talent for self-preservation. Plus, she loved him. She said so last night. Even more, she trusted him. Although if he ditched her in the woods to claw out an existence alone, no doubt she would consider that a breach of faith. He had to think of just the right way to break the news. But what would that be? I love you deeply, but I love Officer School more? That's not going to go over well. And he did love her. He did. It was just that only a few hours in his life in the new wilderness he hated it. The heat, the worms, the birds yakking nonstop. She was certainly taking a long time with the potatoes. Coriolanus glanced out the window. The rain had diminished a sprinkle. She hadn't wanted to go by herself, too lonely. Her song said that she needed, loved, and trusted him. But would she forgive him, even if he deserted her? Billy Tope had crossed her, and he ended up dead. He could hear him now. Makes me sick how you're playing the kids. Poor Lucy Gray, poor lamb. And he see her sinking her teeth into his hand. He thought about how coolly she killed in the arena. First that frail little Wovey that was a cold-blooded move if he ever seen one. Then the calculated way she took out Treach, baiting him to attack her, really so she could whip out the snake out of her pocket. And she claimed that the Reaper had rabies. That was a mercy kill, but who knew? No, Lucy Gray was no lamb. She was made of sugar. She was a victor. He checked to see that the peacekeeper's rifle was loaded, then opened the door wide. She was nowhere in sight. He walked down to the lake, trying to remember where Clerk Carmine had been digging before he brought them to Katniss Plant. It didn't matter. The swampy area around the lake was deserted and the bank undisturbed. Lucy Gray! The only response came from a lone knocking jay on a nearby branch, who made an effort to mimic his voice but failed, as his words were not particularly musical. Give it up, he muttered to the thing. You're no jabberjay. No question she was hiding from him, but why? There could only be one answer. Because she figured it out, all of it. That destroying the guns would wash away all physical evidence of his connection to the murders. That he no longer wanted to run away. That she was witness to time to the crime. But they'd always had each other's back, so why would she suddenly think he might harm her? Why, when only yesterday he'd been pure as the driven snow? Sejanus. She must have figured out Sejanus was the third person Coriolanus had killed. She wouldn't have to know anything about the stunt with the Jabberjays, only that he'd been Sejanus' confidant, and that Sejanus was a rebel, while Coriolanus was a defender of the capital. Still, to think he'd kill her? He looked down at the loaded gun in his hands. Maybe he should have left it in the shed. It looked bad coming after her armed, and as if he was hunting her. But he wasn't really going to kill her, just talk to her and make sure she saw sense. Put down the gun, he told himself, but his hands refused to cooperate. All she has is a knife. A big knife. The best he could manage was to sling the gun on his back. Lucy Gray, are you okay? You're scaring me. Where are you? All she had to say was, I understand. I'll go alone, like I was planning to all along. But just this morning she admitted she didn't think she could make it on her own, that she'd return to the covey after a few days. She knew he wouldn't believe her. Lucy Gray, please, I want to talk to you, he shouted. What was her plan here? To hide until he grew tired and went back to base? And then sneak back home again? That didn't work for him. Even with the murder weapon gone, she'd still be dangerous. What if she went back to District 12 now and the mayor succeeded in getting arrested? What if they interrogated her or even tortured her? That story would come out. She hadn't killed anyone. He had. His word against hers. Even if they didn't believe her, his reputation would be destroyed. The romance would be revealed along with the details of how he cheated in the Hunger Games. Dean Highbottom might be brought in as a character witness. He couldn't risk it. Still no sign of her. She was giving him no choice but to hunt her down in the woods. The rain had stopped now, leaving the air humid and the earth muddy. He went back to the house and scanned the ground until he found a slight imprint of her shoes, then followed her tracks until he reached the brush where the woods began in earnest and quietly made his way into the dripping trees. Bird chatter filled his ears, and the overcast sky made visibility poor. The underbrush concealed her footprints, but somehow he felt he was on the right track. Adrenaline sharpened his senses, and he noticed a snapped branch here, a scuff mark in the moss there. He felt a bit guilty frightening her the way. But what was she doing, quivering the bushes while she tried to suppress her sobs? The idea of life without him must be breaking her heart. A patch of orange caught his eye, and he smiled. "I don't want you to lose me," she said, and he hadn't. He pushed the branches into the small clearing canopied by trees. The orange scarf lay across some briars where it had apparently blown loose and snagged as she fled. Oh well, confirmed he was on the right track. He went to retrieve it. Maybe he kept it after all when a faint rustle in the leaves pulled him up short. He just registered the snake when it struck, uncoiling like a spring and digging its teeth into the forearm extended toward the scarf. "Ah!" he screamed in pain. They released him immediately and slid it into the brush before he even had a chance to look at it. Panic set in as he stared at the red, arched bite mark on his forearm, panic and disbelief. Lucy Gray had tried to kill him. This was no coincidence. The trailing scarf, the poised snake, what Ivory had said she always knew where to find them. This was a booby trap. He walked right into it. Poor lamb indeed. He was beginning to sympathize with Billy Tope. Coriolanus knew nothing about snakes other than the rainbow ones in the arena. Feet rooted to the ground, heart racing, he expected to die on the spot, but while the wound hurt, he was still standing. He didn't know how long he might have, but by all things know, she was going to pay for this. Should he tie off the arm with a tourniquet, stuck out the venom? They hadn't done survival training yet. Afraid his first aid treatments might only spread the poison more swiftly through his system, he yanked his sleeve down over his forearm, pulled his rifle over his shoulder, and started after her. If he'd feel better, he'd have laughed at the irony of how quick the relationship deteriorated in their own private Hunger Games. She wasn't so easy to track now, and he realized that earlier clues had been left to lead him directly to the snake. But she couldn't be far away. She wanted to know if the thing killed him or if she could form another plan. Maybe she hoped he'd pass out so she could cut his throat with a long knife. Trying to quiet his panting, he moved deeper into the woods, gently pushing the branches back with the nose of the rifle. But it was impossible to discern her whereabouts. Think, he told himself, where would she go? The answer hit him like a ton of bricks. She would not want to battle him armed with a knife. When she had only a knife, she returned to the lake house to get the gun herself. Perhaps she circled around and he was headed there right now. He strained his ears, and yes, he thought he could hear someone moving off to his right, retreating to the lake. He started running towards the sound, then stopped abruptly. Sure enough, having heard him, she was flying through the underbrush, realizing what he had realized, no longer caring if he heard her. He estimated her to be about 10 yards away, lifted the rifle to his shoulder, and released a spray of bullets in her direction. A flock of birds squawked as they took the air, and he heard a faint cry. Got you, he thought. He crashed through the woods after her, branches and thorns catching his clothes and scratching his face, and all of it, till he came to the spot where he guessed her to be. There was no trace of her. No matter. She would have to move again, and when she moved, he'd find her. "Lucy Gray," he said in a normal voice. "Lucy Gray, it's not too late to work something out." Of course, it was, but he owed her nothing, certainly not the truth. "Lucy Gray, won't you talk to me?" Her voice surprised him, lifting suddenly and sweetly in the air. Are you coming to the tree? Wear a necklace of rope side by side with me. Strange things didn't happen here. No stranger would it be if we met up at the midnight and hanging tree. And yes, I get it. He thought you know about Sejanus, necklace of rope and all that. He took a step in her direction just as a mockingjay picked up her song, then a second, and a third. The woods came alive with their melody as dozens joined in. He dove through the trees and then opened fire in the spot the voice had come from. Had he hit her? He couldn't tell because the bird song filled his ears, disorienting him. Little black specks swarmed in the field of vision, and his arm began to throb. "Lucy Gray," he bellowed in frustration. Clever, devious, deadly girl. She knew they'd cover for her. He lifted the rifle and machine gunned the trees, trying to wipe out the birds. Then he fluttered in the sky, but the song had spread and the woods were alive with it. "Lucy Gray, Lucy Gray!" Furious, he turned this way and that, and finally blasted the woods in a full circle, going around and around until his bullets were spent. He collapsed on the ground, dizzy and nauseous, as the woods exploded, every bird of every kind screaming its head off, while the mockingjays continued their rendition of the hanging tree. Nature gone mad, genes gone bad, chaos. He had to get out of here. His arm began to swell. He had to get back to base. Forcing himself to his feet, he trampled back to the lake. Everything in the house remained as he had left. At least he prevented her from getting back. Using a pair of socks as gloves, he wiped off the murder weapon, crammed all the weapons back into the burlap bag, hoisted it over his shoulder, and ran to the lake. Judging it heavy enough to sink without being weighted down with rock, he plunged it into the lake and towed it into the deeper water. He submerged the bag and watched it spiral slowly down into the gloom. An alarming tingling enveloped his arm. The clumsy dog paddled, carried him back to shore, and he staggered back to the house. What of the supplies? Should he drone those as well? No point. Either she was dead and the covey would find them, or she was alive and she would hope to use them to escape. He threw the fish into the fire to burn and left closing the door tightly behind him. The rain began, a real downpour. He expected it would wash away any trace of his visit. The guns were gone, the supplies were Lucy Gray's. The only thing that remained were his footprints. Those were melting before his eyes. The cloud seemed to be infiltrating his brain. He struggled to think, get back, he must get back to base, but where was it? He pulled his father's compass from his pocket, amazed it still worked after the dunking in the lake. Crassus snow was out there somewhere, still protecting him. Coriolanus clung to the compass, a lifeline in the storm as he headed south. He stumbled through the woods, terrified and alone, but feeling his father's presence beside him. Crassus might not have thought much of him, but he'd have wanted his legacy to live on. Perhaps Coriolanus had redeemed himself somewhat today. None of it would matter if the venom killed him. He stopped to vomit, wishing he'd brought along a jug of water. He vaguely realized his DNA would be on that too, but who cared? The jug wasn't a murder weapon, it didn't matter, he was safe. If the covey found Lucy Gray's body, they wouldn't report it. They wouldn't want the attention it brought. It might connect them to the rebels or reveal their hideout. If there was a body, he could not even confirm he'd hit her. Coriolanus made it back, not to the hanging tree exactly, but to District 12, wandering out of a stretch of trees into a clump of miners' hovels and somehow finding the road. The ground shook with thunder, and lightning slashed the sky as he reached the town square. He saw no one as he made it to the base and climbed back to the fence. He went straight to the clinic, claiming he'd stopped to tie his shoe on his way to the gym when a snake appeared out of nowhere to bite him. The doctor nodded. The rain brings him out. Does it? Coriolanus thought his story would have been challenged or at least met with skepticism. The doctor didn't seem suspicious. Did you get a look at it? Not really. It was raining, and it moved fast. Am I going to die? Hardly, the doctor chuckled. It wasn't even venomous. See those tooth marks? No fangs. Going to be sore for a few days, though. Are you sure? I threw up. I couldn't think straight, he said. Well, panic can do that. She cleaned the wound. Probably leave a scar. Good thought, Coriolanus. So remind me to be more careful. She gave him several shots in a bottle of pills. Come by tomorrow. We'll check it again. Tomorrow I'll be reassigned to District 2, replied Coriolanus. Visit the clinic there, then. Good luck, soldier. Coriolanus went back to his room, shocked to find it was only mid-afternoon. Between the blues and the rain, his bunkmates had never risen. He went to the bathroom and emptied his pockets. The lake water had reduced his mother's rose-scented powder to a nasty paste. He threw the whole thing in the trash. The photos stuck together and shredded. He tried to separate them, so they went to the way of the powder. Only the compass had survived the outing. He peeled off his clothes, scrubbed off the last bits of lake. When he dressed, he took down his duffel and began to pack, returning the compass to his box of personal items and stowing it in a deep bag. On reflection, he opened up Sejanus' locker and took his box as well. When he got to District 2, he'd mail it to the plinth with a note of condolence. That would be appropriate as Sejanus' best friend, and who knew, maybe the cookies would keep coming. Following morning, after a tearful goodbye from his bunkmates, he boarded the hovercraft for District 2. Things improved immediately. Plush seat, the attendant, the beverage selection, not luxurious by any means, but a far cry from the recruit train. Comforted by comfort, he leaned his temple against the window, hoping to get a nap. All night, while rain had drummed on the barracks roof, he wondered where Lucy Gray was, dead in the rain, curled up by the fire in the lake house. If she survived, surely she abandoned the idea of returning to District 12. He dozed off with the melody of the hanging tree humming in his brain and woke later as the hovercraft touched down. Welcome to the capital, the attendant said. Coriolanus' eyes popped up. What? No, did I miss my stop? I have to report to District 2. This craft goes on to 2, but we have orders to drop you here, said the attendant, checking the list. I'm afraid you need to disembark. We have a schedule to keep. Uh-huh. He found himself at the tarmac of a small, unfamiliar airport. A peacekeeper's truck pulled up, and he was ordered into the back. As he rattled along, unable to get any information from the driver, dread seeped into him. There had been a mistake, or had there? What if they somehow linked him to the murders? Maybe Lucy Gray had returned and accused him, and they needed to question him. Would they drag the lake for the weapons? His heart gave a little jump as they turned onto Scholars Road and drove past the academy, quiet and still on that summer afternoon. There was the park where they sometimes hung out after school, the bakery with the cupcakes he loved. At least he'd be granted one more glimpse of his hometown. Nostalgia faded as the truck made a sharp turn, and he realized they were headed up to the drive to the Citadel. Inside, the guards waved him right through the elevator. She's expecting you in the lab. He held on to the thin hope that she meant Dr. K, not Dr. Gall, but his old nemesis waved to him from across the lab as he stepped off the elevator. Why was he here? Was he going to end up in one of the cages? As he crossed to her, he saw her drop a live baby mouse into a tank of golden snakes. So the victor returns. Here, hold these. Dr. Gall pushed a metal bowl filled with squirming pink rodents in his hands. Coriolanus pressed the gag. Hello, Dr. Gall. I got your letter and your jabberjay. Too bad about young Plinth. Although, is it really? Anyway, I was pleased to see you were continuing your studies in 12, developing your worldview. He felt himself pulled right back into ulterior there as if nothing happened. Yeah, it's eye-opening. I thought about all the things we talked about. Chaos, contract, control, the 3 C's. Did you think about the Hunger Games? The day we met, Casca asked you what their purpose was, and you gave a stock answer to punish the districts. Would you change that now? Coriolanus remembered the conversation he had with Sejanus and they unpacked his duffel. I'd elaborate on it. They're not just to punish the districts, they're part of the eternal war, each one in its own battle, one we can hold on the palm of our hand instead of waging a real war that would get us all out of control. She swung a mouse away from the gaping mouth. You there, don't be greedy. And the remainder of what we did to each other, we have the potential to do again because of who we are, he continued. And who are we, did you determine, she asked. Creatures who need the capital to survive. You couldn't help getting in a dig. It's all pointless, though, the Hunger Games. No one in 12 even watches it, except for the reaping. We didn't even have a working TV on base. Well, that could be a problem in the future. It's a blessing this year, given that I had to erase the whole mess, said Dr. Gall. It was a mistake getting those students mixed up in it, especially when they started dropping like flies. Presenting the capital is far too valuable. You erased it, he asked. Every last copy gone, never to be aired again. I have a master in the vault, of course, but that's just for my own amusement. He was glad about the erasure. It was just one more way to eliminate Lucy Gray from the world. The capital would forget her, the districts would barely know her, and the District 12 had never accepted her as one of their own. A few years, there would be a vague memory that a girl had once sung in the arena. That'd be forgotten, too. Goodbye, Lucy Gray. We hardly knew you. Not a total loss. I think we're bringing Flickerman back next year, and your idea about betting is keeper. You need to somehow make the viewing mandatory. No one in 12 will tune in to something that depressing by choice. They spend what little free time they have drinking to forget the rest of their lives. Dr. Gall chuckled. It seems you learned a lot on your summer vacation, Mr. Snow. Vacation, he said, perplexed. Well, what were you going to do here? Lazing around the Capitol, combing out your curls? I thought a summer with peacekeepers would be far more educational. She took in the confusion on his face. You don't think I've invested all this time in you to hand you off to those imbeciles in the district, do you? I don't understand. I was told, he began. She cut him off. I've ordered you an honorable discharge, effective immediately. You're to study under me at university. University? Here at the Capitol? He said in surprise. She dropped one last mouse in the tank. Classes start Thursday.